All right, well, welcome back to Brass Tactics. We're lucky enough to have Matt back with me and Pete this week, and of course, I'm always Joe. And this week, since in some ways, I guess the foreign policy executive orders have slowed down a little bit, and we kind of already went pretty hard on our what'll happen when Doge starts turning in on the Department of Defense. Next, we were just gonna talk about one of the topics that we were going to cover from our New Year's resolution episode. And we're going to start off with Gaza because I don't think there's even enough to speculate too long on that for. And then I guess we'll switch to Ukraine since we were already fighting about that before this recording even took off. And so with that, gentlemen, how do we feel about Plaza de Gaza?
Wasn't the last time we
The
talked?
Riviera of the Middle East. Why? First of all, what? Second of all, why? And then I guess also just how. I have many questions.
Wasn't the last time we talked, guys, on this show the joint logistics over the shore giant floating dock with the two logisticians in attendance?
Yes, you just love talking about the floating pier and the mulberries, Peter.
Oh, but they're so cool! Shout out to
Well,
Fort Eustis.
so it's cool, and to be sort of like macabrely frank about it, probably did need to test that bad boy out before we tried launching it on Taiwan. Because we're all thinking the next time this thing sees action is probably.
Lo and behold, it doesn't work in anything beyond Sea State 2.
And if it's not going to work in the sheltered alcoves of the Eastern Mediterranean, it has a snowflake in hell in the Western Pacific.
To be fair, right, it works better than no pier at all, which is kind of the shtick it's going for. Is it much more limited than a conventional pier? Yeah. Does it take as long to set up? No. Did we probably screw it up installing it because we don't get to play with it very much? Also very valid. Did we probably learn some stuff for the next time we would try to implement it, and we can probably do that better? Very much so, because now that experience is going to be ingrained into the unit, operationally speaking, long enough that I think that expertise will stay around when it unfortunately is going to be called upon again.
Did we try and put a CRAM on top of it? Yes.
And why not? You gotta have. Hey, if the Russians can put a what did they put on the back of that LST
It
alligator?
was a Tor.
A Tor. They can just slap a Tor. They're like, we can put a CRM on a dock, dude. The sky's the limit if you have enough chains and ratchet straps.
Forget about radar calibration and having to have the thing steady. It'll
Don't
just
worry about that. It's fine. If it works on the land, it'll work on a boat. So
well,
how
on
did
to the
this?
question at hand, Joe. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know where that came from or how long it's going to persist in the news cycle. I mean, if Greenland's already kind of fading into the rearview mirror at this point. I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of these flash in the pans that we talk about.
Well, he's tripled down on this one in the past 2 weeks now. Like
Yeah.
I thought it was stray voltage, like you were just saying, Matt, but then President Trump does not seem to have let it go. Like we're pretty solidly on this.
Yeah, but you also have the added wrinkle where it comes with where the heck did the 1.5 million Palestinians go? Because the Egyptians and the Jordanians have repeatedly now said, I think 3 times, they're not taking any more Palestinians, and they won't be, what's the word for it? They won't be happy if there's a mass deportation of said Gazan Palestinians.
Yeah.
No one wants them. No one wants to move them. And every time they've tried putting them somewhere else, it hasn't worked. Whether it was Black September in Jordan in the 70s, whether the Kuwaitis kicking them all out in the 90s, traditionally trying to resettle large amounts of Palestinians has not been successful.
Ugh. Grim. Very grim.
So then where are they going to go?
Well, you can't put them in the West Bank. There's no room for them there either.
Lots of land on the Sinai Peninsula here.
Yeah. Very fertile. Great for wandering in for 40 years. As long as it's raining bread in the morning, you're fine. But if it's not raining bread, you're gonna run into some issues.
They just need the sandworms from Iraq, yes, and they can find spice there, and everyone will be happy.
Well, I hear some land open up, and I hear some land's been opening up for some new opportunities in Syria in the past 4-ish years.
Yeah, but we need to fill that with Syrians. At least that's what the Europeans are saying.
Well, I mean, how are you going to get them back? They don't have anything remotely like ICE.
Yeah, they really don't do that.
No, they don't. The whole European Union was based around passports are just suggestions. We're not going to enforce borders on each other.
Oh, that didn't last that long.
Well, so once you get in, there's not really a way to get you out. Plus, like Poland has an entire economic section that's dependent on migrant worker populations, right? So like this open border thing is so ingrained. It's like it's economically untenable to try and close the borders over there at this point.
I mean, not really though. I mean, 2014, the Schneegen borders came slamming shut. I mean, I don't think they've really they haven't opened to the extent that they have before the first migrant wave back in, I think, 14, 15.
No, but once you're in,
Once you're in, you're
that's
in.
what.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Once you're in, you're in. Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I got that. Oh,
I mean, even once you get to England, they're mobbing the trucks going through the channel, going in under the channel.
yeah. Yeah, right.
LA and France right there. There's a bunch of them that just hang out waiting for their chance to get over to England because England must be even better than Europe,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not part of the EU anymore.
Yeah, the only place where you're actually getting border control is what? Poland and Belarus?
And Finland and Russia.
And Finland and Russia, yeah, where the same thing is happening, where the Russians are weaponizing migrants and trying to push them across the border.
Yeah, come to Russia. It's great here. Oh, by the way, now we're going to weaponize you and try to send you into Europe the wrong way. Here you go.
Yeah. Hey, Berlin's that way. Go.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, back to Palestine, I really feel like, I mean, the solution is a peacekeeping force there, but there's politically no appetite for that in any country because you're bound to take casualties, and no one wants another Mogadishu. I mean, Mogadishu, pretty much Operation Restore Hope, forever killed any chance of the U.S. being involved in peacekeeping missions like that again.
Oh, yeah, and Gaza is like 10 times worse than Mogadishu because it's so small and built up.
So
There's no, where would you put the base? Where would you put the coalition compound?
Bring back the Pier, Pete.
No. We just need to bulldoze all the buildings into the Med and double the size.
So that was so just sort of springboarding off of that and backing it up just a little bit. We jumped immediately to talking about where these Palestinians are going to go for mainly because step one of this supposed great American plan of building a Mediterranean Riviera requires leveling everything because nothing is structurally tenable over there anymore because everything's been shelled and mortared and rocketed into oblivion. So it's like a complete tear down and rebuild. And while you're doing that, one, people can't live there. Two, people that are there are probably going to pose a risk given the amount of terrorism that seems to have been there for this entire duration. And so step
I mean, we got attacked, like the U.S. got literally attacked unloading humanitarian supplies.
So step one is you have to displace all of these people, even if it's just theoretically temporary. But none of the nearby neighbors want to take them. And then step two would be tearing down, which seems like a simple process. But then step three is where it gets fuzzy again from like a foreign policy perspective. This seems like a whole lot of investment of at least U.S. capital, if not U.S. personnel, and creating jobs, as one of the implications was, for what's really amounts to a very unclear gain. Like who's benefiting from this other than Israel having one less flank to worry about?
Yeah. Man, have you actually looked up the stats on the destruction of the Gaza Strip over the last year? 80% of the trees are gone, 60% of the buildings are gone, and 2/3 of the farmland is ripped up. So that is, dude, it's not quite Stalingrad levels, but that is thoroughly destroyed.
And who's going to pay for it to be rebuilt at this point?
Yeah.
The Palestinian authorities, not Hamas, not, well, even if they had the money, they're not going to. They want their people to be miserable.
Yep. That's how they keep them under control.
You give it to Israel, you just created a whole different problem and potentially genocide.
Yep. I mean, it's still going to be, I mean, this is the thing. It's like, if you're moving out those Palestinians, it's ethnic cleansing no matter how you slice it, right? You're doing a mass deportation of an ethnic group.
Providing a context to this, just sort of like a brief recap of the last 20-ish years, the United States does not have a good strategic track record for stability or peacekeeping or state-building operations in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And by "does not good," you mean by that very, very bad.
Yeah, I'm just politely understating it because I don't know if the political trauma has like subsided from the 3-ish years that we've displaced from finally what amounts to giving up in Afghanistan. I'm sure I'd get hate mail for phrasing it that way if we had people listening. But yeah, Like,
Please send us mail, please.
call,
Let
calling
us hate now.
calling a spade, right? Like, didn't go well. That was only 3 years ago. Why do
Yeah.
we seem hell bent on committing to the Middle East? Because that puts us awfully close to Iran too.
And there's no strategic benefit to it whatsoever.
That's so racking my brain on this, right? So we saw from the mobile pier incident that semi-permanent naval structures are not really tenable in the Mediterranean. You could probably build something more permanent. But is there a particular strategic benefit from doing it in Gaza? Like, Djibouti's pretty much sold all of its harbor space to competitors, for lack of a better word. And I suppose that puts you pretty close to the Hellespont where you'd have easy access to the Black Sea. Is this just the best time to just grab a piece of strategic land that you could leverage for a force projection into the Mediterranean later? But if it is,
We don't need it.
right,
We have Cyprus.
if it is, why? Like, there's just, it's really hard to see what the end game would be here, unless it's just straight up going to be a Mediterranean resort that is just all proceeds go to the U.S. sovereign wealth fund.
I mean, no. The only thing I can also think of, I don't know, what do you think, Matt? Like, maybe now that we've kicked the Russians out of Syria, if we grab Gaza, it'll prevent the Russians from doing anything. But there's no way in heck the
Russians couldn't do anything in Gaza right now if they wanted to. The whole
They can't
reason
do anything in Syria. Yeah.
they don't have a port, and they don't have an air base. There's
Yeah.
no port in Gaza, and the airport there was open for all like 3 weeks before it closed forever. So
Yeah. And then by the same token, the Chinese have not expressed any interest whatsoever in grabbing overseas territories pretty much anywhere. I mean, you could say like maybe Colombo, right? Like the port in Colombo, Sri Lanka, where that they built and got a lease, and then Djibouti, but that's it. They already got Djibouti. They don't need another base in the vicinity of the Suez.
the Chinese overseas acquisitions of territory are very low risk, generally speaking. You know, they would never go into somewhere like Hamas.
Yeah. I mean, it would be very funny though. It'd be like a reverse legation city. You know, it's like revenge for Tsingtao and Shanghai. It's China now buys up Gaza.
Yeah, stranger things have happened, but I can't imagine much stranger than that, Pete.
It's freaking hilarious. I didn't have that on my 2015 bingo card.
There's a lot of things I haven't had on my bingo card in the last.
I don't think China can afford to buy much of anything these days.
Well, you spend everything prepping for an invasion of Taiwan. You don't have much money to splurge
Yeah.
on the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, they're focusing on closer war mortar ports right now.
That you can.
Taipei is a little bit. Yeah, Taipei's probably a better investment.
Well, and they're footing at least a fair proportion of the bill at this point for Russia's antics.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, Pete. I mean, how many superconductors does Gaza make a year, anyways?
Oh, good point. Didn't even think of that. Oh, yeah, the whole idea is just nonsense. There's no actual benefit whatsoever that I can buy. I don't think any of us could even think of.
I mean, Gaza is the ultimate Gordian knot. I mean, there's no way to untangle it without drastic action, and drastic action is politically unfeasible for whoever touches it, whether it's Israel, whether it's the U.S., whether it's Egypt, whether it's there's no way to solve the problem.
That's a great freaking metaphor, dude. Because like the Israelis are dancing on a knife edge right now of like popular opinion vis-a-vis the freaking war against the Palestinians, right? It's like, they've killed a lot of freaking. How many civilians they killed? 45,000 now.
45,000 maybe.
40 freaking thousand, dude. That's a lot. That's a lot of freaking people they killed. But because they've been able to spin things and keep it relatively proportional in the eyes of the world media, the condemnation has seemed to have petered out. So they can't risk it, right? You can't really risk being like, now that was 40K. Yeah, that was good. Watch this. For my next trick, I'll make 1.5 million Palestinians disappear.
Well, they've got 2,000-pound bombs again. We gave them the Mark 82s back.
Oh my god! But you can't just bomb them all. I mean, geez Louise, dude, do it the hard way.
I never said that, Pete. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's true. They got plenty of bombs. And hey, what if Hamas? What's the deadline? Hamas has until Saturday
at high noon. And
high noon.
How much you want? Nothing comes of it. Just like the war in Ukraine was going to stop 24 hours after a certain date and point in time.
For those of you who need a recap, please see our Is-Retaliation episode from early April last year of how Gaza became to where it's at now and Israel's role and origin story, as it were.
Well, that was a good episode. That was definitely my top 3 favorite episodes. Was that a Matt episode too, or was that just us?
I don't remember
No,
that one.
Oh, I don't think I knew yet.
that didn't come until the summer. I can't remember when.
Our loss.
I'm a recurring guest character.
The best kind. You know, like when you walk into the 90s sitcom and the studio audience goes,
Please clap. Oh, I'm sorry.
For Matt's origin,
Please
this is our 13 May episode of The Warrior's Worth.
I love it. Matt's origin story.
Warrior's Worth.
Also,
that's
the Palestine question.
was
So,
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. We were talking about how much is it worth in dollars and cents.
Yeah, how much is a soldier worth? I remember that was a good one.
they're all great ones. Why else would we be doing this? We're certainly not getting paid for
Good
it,
point.
gentlemen.
We're masochists.
Moving on. So, we hope we have been able to clarify something we hope we have not been able to clarify something about this whole Gaza objective for you, because frankly, we have no clue.
The brightest minds have helped us solve the problem.
So, I don't know. At some point, it seems like the gut instinct here, foreign policy wise, is if you can't break it, buy it. So,
Oh, yeah.
Canada, the Panama
If
Canal.
anyone breaks it, we buy it. It's a new meta.
If your friend breaks it, you buy it. It's like taking your friend into the antique mall and they're really clumsy.
No, I can't. No, this is why. No, that only happened once. Now you can't take me anywhere.
So, shifting on to the conversation that is probably going to be a lot more animated and at least directional, we've had some interesting stuff alluded to and spoken of in bits and pieces by our president and by the Secretary of Defense about a possible close to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Don't everybody start at once.
Well, happening in the context of the Munich Security Conference, right? Which is pretty stinking massive, isn't it, Matt? Every country, NATO comes, the Japanese come, Koreans come.
Yeah, and coincidentally, where was the agreement that gave away Czechoslovakia signed? Was it Munich or was it somewhere else?
It's a crazy coincidence, dude. I brought that one up in class this morning.
Munich agreement. Hey, well, we're done here. You just give us the rest of Czechoslovakia after we took the Sudetenland. We'll be good. We promise.
The peace in our time, the peace in our time meme is particularly apt for this one.
For those of us who were playing Skyrim when we should have been reading European current events books.
Or sleeping through AP Euro, apparently.
What is this Czechoslovakia?
Oh, well, in the late 1930s, Germany launched on a period of territorial expansion. It took back the Rhineland in 1936 and 1938, and the Anschluss that took Austria, and also in 1938, it took the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia, and then later on in 1939, after taking the juiciest, best portion of Czechoslovakia with all the border defenses, it came back to the rest of Europe and said, you know what, we're ready to go to war over the rest of Czechoslovakia, but if you just have them submit to us, we won't attack anywhere else. So that was March of 1939, I think, Pete? And then 6 months later, they rolled into Poland. So they definitely went by that agreement, the Germans then.
Now, does Chamberlain's government... No, Chamberlain stays in power. His government don't collapse until after September, right?
No, his government doesn't collapse until early 1940 when...
40, yeah. You're right.
After Norway, and that's when Winston Churchill comes in.
Right. Completely forgot about that.
But yes, Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister at the time, famously holds up a piece of paper when he arrives back in Britain after the Munich Agreement signed with Hitler and says, we have peace in our time, there will not be another world war. And yeah, that was a really bad hot take. Did not age.
This was appeasement, right?
Appeasement, yes.
I would again counter, like I was saying, I was discussing with Matt before, that this is not so much like 38, 39 as it is closer to 1940s Finland's winter war against the Russians, where you have a smaller state being pounded on by a much stronger neighbor and being essentially forced to knuckle under and accept an unfavorable peace terms because it's not getting assistance from outside that could otherwise allow it to resist for longer.
With the dynamic being shifted slightly, and that Finland was in unilateral negotiations with the Russians, whereas right now the negotiations, from everything I've read, are strictly the United States and Russia, whereas the country in question is having no part of the discussions over their own fate.
No, it's because Trump had a phone call with Zelensky after he talked with Putin,
He did.
and then they're meeting with the Ukrainians on Friday of this week, the 14th, on the sidelines of Munich, specifically before they meet with the Russians. So talk with the Ukrainians first, and then they're going to meet.
Yeah, it's just interesting because Trump more or less alluded to the fact that he thinks Zelensky's polling numbers aren't that great and that he'll have to accept the deal or not accept the deal. But I mean, it comes down to the big what if. I mean, what if Ukraine says no? Get bent. We're not accepting this deal. Sorry.
The Ukrainians could, I mean, and that's the thing. They get the vote. If they get no and they say, and they refuse to back down, that's the thing. So you've got to say, like, they actually have some leverage in this, the Ukrainians, because if they decide to say, well, with or without U.S. help, we're going to continue to fight, that backfires the whole thing right back in Trump's face.
Oh yeah.
Because now instead of the deal maker, now he looks like. So it, like I said, like, despite what certain figures on the right are saying, the Ukrainians are not hapless stooges, right? And we agree with this, right? Like, the whole reason the war is going on, the whole reason the war started, was because the Ukrainians resisted the Russian invasion. We didn't put a gun to freaking Zelensky's head and told him to stay in Kiev. We aren't personally keeping those Ukrainians in the trenches on the Eastern Front right now.
I was trying to explain this to someone just in context because it's really hard to imagine Europe and Ukraine where everything is. But I was talking with someone. I said, biggest analogy. Let's imagine the U.S. invades Canada, and after 3 years of grinding warfare and hundreds of thousands of casualties, we're halfway to Ottawa. That's basically where the Russians are at this point in terms of territorial expansion. And quite frankly, if the Ukrainians keep fighting, eventually the Russians are going to cry uncle. It's just a question of who cries uncle first.
We did try that, and we did not get halfway to Ottawa.
Oh, we tried like 3 times.
Yeah.
Don't forget the Fenians in the 1870s.
Yep. American Revolution, War of 1812, and the Fenian incursion.
Let's go, Irish bros. Where you at? Let's go invade Canada.
Didn't work out well for them, Pete.
Oh, and the government disavowed all knowledge of their existence. Bye.
Bye. Have fun
No,
storming the castle.
so realistically speaking, right, unless something drastically changes in the status quo, there is I don't think Ukraine is going to have its sovereign territory restored.
I would agree
It
with
depends how much. You need to be
Depends how
specific.
much.
I think the best that they can hope for is that they have to cede whatever Russia's holding at the time of the ceasefire. Because if you look at it from the other perspective, if Russia could have stopped, they would have. I think the only thing that stops Russia is something that they can spin as a victory or governmental implosion because somebody assassinates Putin.
Yeah, but that's a hope, and that hope is not a good strategy.
Those are the only
Eastern Europeans are the first to tell you.
Those are the
That's
only
not
two
smart.
ways. Those are the only two ways. This we literally have a cool hand Luke situation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that movie, but
You're
Russia.
talking about a failure in communication?
Yeah. No, just because Cool Hand Luke, he didn't come in with much, but he just wouldn't leave.
Yeah, I would
Right.
also offer that, I mean, in terms of negotiating and looking at strategy, and, I'm not a negotiator, I'm not a grand policy person, anything like that. I almost feel like we're flipping over some of our cards on the table before it's even time to show our hand, if you're looking at it from a negotiation standpoint.
Yeah, because admitting in context, Secretary Hegseth said today, I want to say, or was it yesterday, in Germany, but not at the Munich conference, that essentially what Joe said, the return of Ukraine to its pre-1914 borders, which would mean the return of both Crimea. 2014. Jeez Louise, sorry.
Historian.
Did I say 2004?
You said
1914.
Oh, 19. Okay, you guys have got me. You got me spun up, man. I say Munich. I'm thinking 1900. Sorry. Yeah, the return of Ukraine to its 2014 borders, aka Crimea and then Donetsk and Luhansk, he said, are non-starters, as well as the big concession, Ukraine ever being in NATO. Right. So those are kind of like what you could say the maximalist Ukrainian aims from the very beginning of the war, like what Zelensky has been saying since the very start of the war in 2022. Heggs is saying those are non-starters. Not going to happen.
Counterpoint, you only have to honor half of those things after peace happens. Then that whole pesky Title V, if you attack one of us, we attack you, things happen. And
we have,
frankly, this would not have been the first time that NATO misconstrued how many members NATO would have when talking with Russia.
That's, I think, why the other key, this is what I'm telling you, because this stuff came out after Putin's phone call with Trump. I'm telling you, that was part of it, because then they come around and say there won't be any American troops being peacekeepers in Ukraine.
No.
It will only be Europeans, and then those Europeans will not be covered under Article 5. I guarantee that was a Putinism. I guarantee it. There's no way anybody on our side would have thought of that. That was the thing that Putin was like, you are not going to do what you did to Yeltsin in 97 and said, oh, well, we're taking the Visegrad NATO group, Hungary, Czechia, Slovakia, and Poland, and then we're not going to take any more. We're not going to take the Baltic states, because we told Yeltsin that under the Clinton administration, and then we turned around and brought in the second wave in 2001 through 4.
There was never an agreement that said that anywhere, though.
I know that, but in the Russian historiography and in their context, this kind of like, I think it was just saying offhand, well, it was an understanding we had, and so they get to cry betrayal, and then have that in the back of their mind. So like,
which is awful rich on their part, because they can't even honor a written agreement, let alone.
Well, I got that, but the point is, you're trying to bring them to the table, so you have to give something a little sweeter than just a pinky promise. Because these are Russians, they're paranoid.
I mean, if Secretary of Defense Mike Pence says you go in with strength, we didn't go in with strength. You go in with strength, you come into Russia and you say, we're going to flood the market with oil. We're going to lower the price of a barrel of crude to under $25, where you're bleeding rubles on every single one that you sell. We're going to give Ukraine 10 times as much equipment as we did, unless you agree to these terms. That's how you come in with strength. We did not do that.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, that actually sounds more like desperation, where it's like they want a quick win at all costs, right? Just so they can keep moving to other things.
Oh, the current deal sounds like Afghanistan and Qatar in 2021. This sounds like we want to wash our hands of this as quickly as possible, and we're willing to make a deal.
Like at the end of the day, Russia is not going to take anything that causes it to not save face. Like,
I would agree with that. They've lost too many.
Right.
800,000.
They are well past the sunk cost fallacy, and if even there's no way that their control of their information network and what their people hear, there's no way to not spin a victorious narrative. They need to have a victory, or they are just going to keep pushing it. Maybe not up until they're actually ready to deploy a nuclear weapon, but they are going to keep pushing it, and they're not going to say no. And so you're just going to continue to just see this meat grinder effect until something a stalemate. And Russia's ready to break the stalemate. They just want that stuff acknowledged. But obviously, it's just going to happen again, unless Ukraine's in NATO. Like you're just setting up for another, maybe there's a 30-year reprieve here while Russia tries to cover.
To whichever protocol you want to look at, Russia should have never attacked in 2022. There was an agreement in place that they weren't going to, and they did anyway. So an agreement with Russia is pointless, in my opinion. In reality, I'm not advocating for Ukrainian membership in NATO, but at the same time, they need to have.
No, there has to be guarantees.
Otherwise, why would they agree to that deal? It's a terrible deal for them.
The other concern, though, is right. We're talking about an attritional conflict coming up on its 3rd year now. How much longer can the Ukrainians themselves resist this? Because when you look at the level of casualties they're taking and the style of warfare, remember, even the German army. Now, granted, populations were a lot smaller back in 1917, and the Germans had taken way more casualties than the Ukrainians had proportionally. But there does come a point where, when you're in a stalemate attritional conflict, armies will start to fracture, and we don't know what the Ukrainians have in terms of operational depth. The Russians have tons of it, because even if they fracture, right, they're just going to be losing Ukrainian land. But if there is a say a black day of the Ukrainian army, like there is in August 1918, then our bargaining situation would go from bad to catastrophic.
At this point, the longer this war goes on, the less intact Ukraine is going to be now too.
Unless the Ukrainians win.
I don't think there's a situation where we can see that where there has not been significant movement of the front. We've given the Ukrainians lots and lots of Western equipment. We have an aborted incursion into Kursk. That's the most recent. They only have 400 square kilometers. There was potential. Where the heck were the Russian defenses? Like, when they went into Kursk, there were none. But there's nothing from that. It's stalled out because they don't have the ability to exploit. They don't have air superiority. They don't have fire superiority. And they don't have the mass that the Russians have just to continue throwing into the problem. They have never been able to do that Zaporizhzhia offensive we were talking about back in fall of 22, right? Where they can strike south and split Crimea and then liberate Mariupol. They just haven't been able to. And so the Russians instead are just grinding them back. And like the only thing that we can say, and you said it yourself, Putin dying or some catastrophic collapse of the Russian command structure. But to be honest, Putin dying might actually be terrible because he's the only one, as far as we know, keeping Russia together.
Right. Russia would definitely implode at that point. There's way too much suppression happening back there.
Unless they just put one of their Putin clones on the throne and said it.
Oh, but where is he, man? Where is he? There is no Putin clone. He's killed them all.
No, I mean, there's at least 3 or 4 different Putins that you look at all the different pictures. Some of them have earlobes off their ears. Some of them have earlobes that are attached to the sides of their head. All I'm saying is the FSB is pulling the strings at that point.
But then how long can that fiction last when you have guys like Kadyrov or, like Gerasimov, these ambitious mothers? Or, oh man, who was that General Armageddon schmuck? Suvrikin, right?
He's at Jalo right now.
Yeah, well, how long will he last? Regardless, like it's a situation that could go from bad to worse, and it's much more likely to happen that against the Ukrainians. Remember, like they are still unwilling to conscript. What's their conscription age right now? The 27-year-olds?
They're not willing to go 18 to 25.
18 to 25, right? So like they're still, because Ukraine is still like in this, like they're still like hoping for the future type thing.
I mean, let me put it this way then. I mean, if you're the U.S. and you think you have a deal with the Russians, how do you sell that to the Ukrainians? I mean, that's the hard part. I mean, at the end of the day, you think you have a deal as the U.S. and the Ukraine's going to say no deal. I mean, I might think I made a wonderful dinner for my kids and they're just going to tell me they don't want to eat it. Doesn't matter what I did. Doesn't matter what.
No, that's totally true. That's the thing. So that's why this has to be a 3-way multilateral talk, which is what it is going to be. They've already said they're going to meet in Saudi Arabia next week, all 3 parties, Ukraine, Russia, America. And then, as I said before, if the American delegation is willing to just kind of sell Ukraine South Lurv, like, oh yeah, Russia, everything east of the Dnieper, no problem, just take it. You know what I mean? Like that kind of ridiculous level of concession. And the Ukrainians just say, absolutely no deal. We're going to keep fighting with or without you. They can freaking do it. They're not fighting with American troops. Like,
and the amount of American aid they've gotten, although people say it's $65 million, when you actually look at it, it's not that much. Because in reality, a lot of that aid was sent here to the U.S. to replenish U.S. stocks on equipment we gave to them that we overpriced in the first place. Like, oh, here's a 40-year-old M113. We're going to charge full value for it, even though it's basically.
Dude, and even if they say all the aid dries up, right? They can continue to fight an insurgency against the Russians. They have an entire population now of highly motivated, very anti-Russian people with lots of drones, lots of explosives, and I mean, it would be an absolute hornet's nest for that to be occupied. Imagine the Russians just trying to walk into Zaporizhzhia like they own the place.
Or Odessa. I mean, the Russians want Odessa.
Or Odessa.
Land bridge.
No, like, yeah. So, like, it's definitely not as cut and dry as people think. So the peace deal will have to be very delicately crafted because the Ukrainians have to agree to this. And you can't just hold a gun to their head and tell them to stop.
Oh, we're going to stop supplying you with aid. Great. Go ahead. That happened.
Right. It's not that dire of a threat.
We really dealt with it. I mean, there was a 6-month period where Congress cut off the funds and Ukraine was left to wither on the vine and they lost territory. They lost Avdiivka. But at the end of the day, there was no Russian breakthrough at that time.
No, like turning off American aid to Ukraine will not make those trenches disappear. It will not make those landmines disappear. It will not make the Dragon's Teeth. Like they have defense in depth for 40 miles back from the border, just like the Russians do.
And there's no American aid required to make a drone that costs $500 using a Mavic or a DJI from China and an RPG board.
Yeah, those are all coming from China, built in like cottage industry in Lviv and Kiev. So yeah, like I said, like the Ukrainians have a very substantial vote in this peace deal, as do the Russians. But again, like I said, another thing we need to consider is the Europeans and their appetite toward this war, right? For me, I'd love to see the French put their money where their mouth is. Like the French have been talking about how taking leadership. All right, guys, if part of this deal is Euro peacekeepers on the front line, they better be 50% French, because Macron's been talking real big about this for the last year, you know? So let's see them pick it up and then ensure that there's no Minsk 3.0.
I mean, what the Russians walk away with? I mean, what's the minimum the Russians will accept in a deal?
I think bare minimum is what Hegseth said. I think they need Crimea, the parts of Donetsk and Luhansk that they had when the war started in 22, and that this is bare minimum. I think they're going to get more than this, and then absolutely no NATO membership for Ukraine. Possibly EU membership.
Or they're going to keep all the territory they still own too, because they've got chunks of I could see them keeping everything in Kherson up to the Dnieper on the other side of Kherson. And then I could see some kind of weird deal where they give back the portions of Kharkiv they have up near, what's the town up there that basically Vovchansk. They
Yep.
give those back in exchange for Ukraine giving back the portions of Kursk it has. That kind
Yeah.
of neutrals out up there. But otherwise, I mean, they're going to. The debatable part is whether or not they take all of Kherson and all of Zaporizhia, because they have large portions of both of them. They have nearly all of Luhansk. They've got like 98% of Luhansk at this point. And if I did some quick Googling, I could probably figure out Donetsk is probably around 80% at this point.
Very much so. So they might end up grabbing Zaporizhzhia east of the Dnieper up to Dnipro, about like 100 or so miles up, but then kind of drawing a line there. But but also you have to think about the condition of the front line everywhere outside of where are the Russians slowly making progress. I think they're only kind of pushing at Donetsk, right? Everywhere else, the line has been frozen for over 2 years.
Well, they're essentially trying to take all of Donetsk and Luhansk so they can spin it as a victory that
Right.
they finally liberated all
Yeah.
of those.
That's the only thing. And they've been plotting there. I think they've been averaging 15 meters a day.
Oh, it makes World War One seem fast, quite frankly.
Yes, it makes the Somme look like lightning war. It's absolutely incredible. I think it's even less than 15 meters a day, to be honest.
I mean, looking at this map right here, from 14 November to 20 May of 2024, it stayed at a solid 18% of Ukraine that they'd taken, and now they're up to like 20% of Ukraine. They've taken very, very little during that time. It's been a slog, as you said, Pete. And really, the major population centers, they don't have any of them still. The only capital, regional capital they captured was Kherson, which they've since lost.
And they lost it, yeah. So they only, like I said, Mariupol? That's like it. And Melitopol. The great Melitopol and Mariupol. Those are your prizes.
Yes, which
Mariupol's
exist. Yes, doesn't exist anymore. You can rebuild it, but it's like rebuilding Warsaw after the end of World War II.
Worse, because there's no people there. They've had to import people from Central Asia to populate it.
Yeah.
Right. Ruski Mir. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's likely. And then you have a nice you have a border that's relatively easy to patrol south of Zaporizhzhia because it's all along the river. And the only part you have to kind of worry about is swung up along the Donetsk Luhansk thing, and then along the possibly the Oskil. They might draw the line at the Oskil River, to be honest, in Kharkiv Oblast, or they might push them all the way to the east.
All right, I found what I was looking for, Pete. Here we go.
To the Krasna.
So
what are you looking for? Deep state map?
Oh yeah, I was trying to find the percentage of each territory that they control.
But I think we can all agree, Russia's not going to accept any terms that don't look like a win. They have to show some sort of measurable, significant gains from the last 3 years, or they're just going to keep at it.
So they've got nearly all of Luhansk, Pete. Luhansk is nearly all Russian controlled. 58% of Kherson, 72% of Zaporizhia, and 61% of Donetsk.
Oh, only 61. They might not get that then.
I mean, they'll probably get it as part of a peace deal.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're going to get it grinding between now and whenever.
Oh, heck no. Again, pending a literal August 1918 style catastrophic collapse, which I don't think so.
Well, even if the Ukrainians did, every time they've had a collapse, like the Ukrainians have not managed their withdrawals well. Whether you look at Vohodar or you look at Avdiivka or even Bakhmut, they've lost way more forces in each one of those withdrawals than they should have. And each one of those points was a massive opportunity for exploitation, maneuver warfare, and the Russian army is incapable of it at this point. Yeah, they can grind forward at the pace of an infantryman, but the ability to conduct combined arms warfare is gone now.
Yeah, and it's because, and we've discussed before, it's the Ukrainians are just unwilling to retreat, right? They'd hold and they hold and they hold until it's literally too late.
Yes.
And then they try a breakout, and the breakout's almost always a disaster.
The German army on the Eastern Front, World War II.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you can't fault them for their bravery, but it's like you got to understand, dude. Retrograding in the face of enemy contact is actually the hardest. Is it the hardest maneuver?
Yeah, it's the hardest maneuver.
Yeah, by far. Like you have to be crack troops in order to do that without breaking, and so they don't. They get in hold.
You see the Ukrainian army finally starting to change its command structure now too, which they should have done years ago, quite frankly.
Yeah, but now they're building a plane in flight.
Yes,
right?
They're finally adopting a core structure. Before they kind of they would have a regional battle group and they would have brigades under it. It was almost like having a brigade combat team report directly to CENTCOM. It would not work well. But now they're putting corps in place, and then they're having their strongest brigades because they have several brigades that are basically divisions by American standards. They're Azov, the 3rd Air Assault, 47th Mech. Some of their better brigades are more or less divisions. If they'd done that previously, they might have had a lot more success. They're starting to do that now. Like Pete said, it's building an airplane in flight. But if the Ukrainians can solve the manpower issue, I really don't see the equipment issue as being as big of a deal now as it was before for them. It's the opposite for Russia. At this point, Russia doesn't have a manpower issue. It has an equipment issue. Some of the latest Russian assaults, they're using civilian vehicles to move forward.
But they're still pushing. And and those North Koreans, don't forget our North Korean friends, by the way. I think almost all of them are dead by now.
I've read 40%. I don't know how many.
Look,
I've heard they were
but
off the front line, though. And I mean, they were only using them in Kursk as well.
Yeah, and in Kursk of all places, this is another thing I wanted to bring up. Like, Russia has such a vast frontage and such a vast superiority in men, and presumably material, but probably not. Why? There again, zero opening of a new frontage. They've continued to plod forward in Donetsk the entire winter without trying to push anywhere else. Like, Belarus is completely abandoned. They've abandoned that idea. They haven't been able to push them out of Kursk. They've abandoned the Belgorod axis. To me, I'm almost wondering what the heck are the Russians thinking? Did they think Trump would get elected and then like automatically just like pull the plug on the Ukrainians? Like, was that what they were hoping?
One of the interesting things I've seen from the Trump administration already is I would call it an orthodox method of resupplying Ukraine. Right after he got into office, you saw several C-17 flights go to Israel, load up with a bunch of PAC-2 interceptors and Patriots the Israelis didn't want anymore, and then fly to, what's the town on the border with Ukraine, the Polish town?
Rzeszów.
Yep, right.
Rzeszów.
Flew there. Wonder why they were going there.
No, the Israelis swore up and down to the Russians they were being refit.
Yes, they were going back to the U.S. for refit after they stopped in Poland. It was on the way home anyways.
Oops. I mean, you can't, the creativity is definitely there.
Right at the same time, all the Mark 82 2,000-pound bombs got freed up for the Israelis. It's crazy how that happened.
Dude, art of the deal, dude. I actually did not put those two things together.
Oh, I did.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, that's good. That's why we have this squad. That's why we have this. But geesh, that's oh yeah, that was another thing I wanted to mention. Sorry. European, I believe there are 7.5 million Ukrainian refugees in Poland right now. And apparently, for example, the Polish, who are one of the most outspoken supporters of the Ukrainians, right? Like, even them, after 3 years of this, the Polish public is starting to get pretty war weary. Obviously, except for the town of Rzeszów, which is experiencing a boom probably similar to what Juneau looked like during the Alaskan gold rush. This tiny little sleepy Polish border town with all the money coming into it and all the NATO battle groups. But for the rest of Poland, it's a lot more of a burden to carry because they're holding a majority of those Ukrainian refugees.
While also trying to avoid all the refugees coming out of Belarus.
Yes. I mean, those are not allowed into Poland. But again, like all the others, they did. And to their credit, like I've been very impressed by the Poles, especially considering their very unsavory history with the Ukrainians that the Russians have tried to propagandize with Bandera in the 1943 and 44. But like, pretty impressive of the Poles to like step it up like that.
I agree, but everyone has a breaking point, in terms of their patience, generosity, everything else. So it'll be interesting to see how long.
Oh, well, there you have it. We will update this as things develop. We'll see what comes out of these meetings in Munich and Saudi Arabia, first and foremost. And in the meantime, go ahead and tell your friends about us in case they have nothing better to do or they get really bored of listening to music on the way to work. If you have any comments or questions or topics you want us to cover, feel free to reach out. You can find us on Twitter X at BrassTactCast, or you can leave a comment or ask questions on the Spotify or Apple podcast page. Thank you, and have a good night. This is when you interject something.
Bye.
It's like our thing.
Yeah. Goodbye.
My
kids were being noisy in the background, so.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's a good way to end it.